acquired quite a lot of work last year, but we've been acquiring work over the last 2 years. So over the next however many weeks until the 11th of March, we have a range of talks. So from directly like artists like Laura here this morning in her studio in Kerry, to Neve McGuinn in a couple of weeks. We have art historians like William Gallagher, who's speaking about Kathy Tynan and Andrew Vickery's work. And we have Sarah McAuliffe talking about Nathaniel Hone, and Seamus Rand speaking about Jack Hanlon. So we have a range of talks which we really feel will speak to the, I suppose, artists' contemporary art practice now, as well as artists who've deceased, and I say take a greater look or a closer look. So we hope, whether you're very familiar with our collection or very familiar with the artists that we're introducing you to, that that you either get a deeper understanding, or if they're unfamiliar, if you don't know, for example, Laura's practice this morning, that you get a good introduction to her practice. So I have to say we were delighted. We tried out something new in the beginning of the pandemic last year. We did our very first open submission, and we, I suppose, made it in honour of Janet Mallarney. She had died in April. And we had a really fantastic response to that, and we had so many artists, over 500 artists entering it, but Laura was one of the entries, and she entered a work called A Very Bad 1-1, and it was a shortlisted work, and we were so delighted that we were able to acquire it later on in the year. I'd have to say it isn't the first time that we've shown Laura's work. Laura worked, I hadn't met Laura before until last year, but Laura's work, Ruined World, was included in an exhibition that we made in 2013 called Reframing the Domestic and Irish Art. So we were delighted to be able to, I suppose, continue a relationship with her. But from that, the opportunity to connect with her, and I have to say these are the opportunities that we have now in relation to this new world that, you know, so many of you mightn't have been here, or Laura mightn't have been here, but the idea of actually us getting into Laura's studio this morning, where she's relocated to. Now, she had been living in Kerry, you're a native of Kerry anyway, Laura, but Laura's been working with the fire station and resident of the fire station artist studios up until December, and has just relocated. So I don't know if you've seen either of the two videos we posted. One was highly humorous and the other one was a little bit more nuanced, but I have to say one of the most important aspects of Laura's work that I really love is her humor. So it's something that I think is so wonderful. Anyway, I'm going to hand over to Laura, and I'd have to ask you if you'd be interested in making comments or asking questions at the end of Laura's talk, and we'd really welcome them. So thanks, Evelyn, and Laura, handing over to you now.
Thanks, Eva, and thanks everybody for coming to the talk that I'm going to share with you. Yeah, I really appreciate the moral support from artists and everybody else in the audience, so thank you all. So I've relocated to Kerry, so I thought I'd start by just showing you where I'm based. I was in the fire station for just under 3 years, and myself and my partner, we've decided to move down to Kerry and kind of give living here a go for 12 months, and that's to kind of manage expectations of my father, who lives across the road, and my two sisters who live right beside us. So this is the studio. So I'm sort of getting set up to make work I'm going to do a show in the Crawford in June, hopefully, this June coming, and a local friend of ours, Dara, I got him in a couple of days ago to do basically make an easel. So I'm going to work on a series of scroll drawings. They have a really nice corridor upstairs in the Crawford Gallery. So I'm going to kind of work on this idea of like Japanese scroll drawing. And then I'm also going to work on, I don't know if anyone saw the kind of intro video I did for this talk. I'm making a series of kind of metal drawings that will become part of an installation for that show. But I'm going to take you back a little bit to A Very Bad 1-1, where kind of a lot of the ideas started to take shape. So I'm just going to share my screen there. So I guess The Very Bad 1-1 kind of became part of the start, I think, of my art practice again. So I'd studied painting in NCD between the years 2003 to 2004. And I'd made some video work from that period, and then I took a few years out and I lived in Kerry, and I did a couple of residencies, and I did one or two public art commissions. But I sort of kind of ran out of road, I think, in my work, and I really felt like I needed to kind of change things somehow. So I had an idea that London might be a good fit, and I applied for a master's there, and was fortunate to get a place in the Royal College of Art. So I guess for me, oh, sorry. So this experience of being at the Royal College of Art, I also entered a painting department there, and I guess like I was always a bit of a closet painter, if that makes sense. Even though I've studied like painting for an unforgivably long amount of time, like 7 years in total when you add up the BA and the MA, but I actually was always sort of drawn for or other kinds of work, even writing. But I decided that at some point during the masters in the RCA that painting was sort of like not for me, or that somehow I didn't really belong in a painting kind of practice. And as well, like at the Royal College of Art, there was this like incredibly kind of commercial tension and atmosphere in the college while I was studying there. So in the year above me, there was an artist called Oscar Merlo, and Oscar, kind of at that time, we were first years, and at that time, his career was like really, really building. And he kind of went on to become like this incredibly successful international artist. He's represented by a huge gallery called David's Werner, which has like headquarters in London and New York, and I think several other places. So there was this sort of, it was sort of like being in art school with Michael Jackson or something. And that's like, you know, great in one sense, but it also created like a huge amount of pressure and jealousy and these really kind of like all-consuming emotions where you either felt like you were on a journey of something really exciting, but more often than not, I think for a lot of us, we felt that we were basically, you know, watching sort of a superstar be born into the art world. So it was a really interesting experience, and I think I kind of absorbed some of that like during the time there, and just kind of absorb some of those just that's kind of surreal thing that happens sometimes where you become so close to something massive happening, but you're really just on the sidelines. Um, so after the Royal College of Art finished, when I finished the masters, I was actually going to move back to Ireland like straight away. I was like, I need to get out of this place. This, you know, clearly has nothing to do with my work. I'm not a painter. I'm never going to be represented by David's Werner Gallery. And I booked my flight home, my Ryanair flight home. And during our degree show, it's just funny sometimes the way like life chose these coincidences along the way. But I ended up meeting someone at the degree show and sort of falling in love, and then deciding to stay on in London. That I sort of decided I had a reason now, because I didn't have any reason prior to that. So this poor unfortunate man, I think, got all the reasons for me to stay projected upon him. Suffice to say, I'm no longer in a relationship, but because I had to stay in London, I also had to get a job, and I had to get a job ASAP. And my sister at the time was working for a charity, and she put me, I think she actually brought me to her like Christmas party, and introduced me to her line manager and was like, can you get my sister a job? You know, she wants to stay in London. So I went for like my first, I suppose, proper interview. Like I've always had bar jobs and waitressing jobs and all sorts of odd jobs over the years, like to kind of support myself, but I'd never had a like proper job. So I remember, I'll never forget like going to this office in Waterloo in central London, applying for this administrative role in a housing charity, and it was called Central and Cecil, where inspiration lives was the full like tagline they used. So so I started working for them. They somehow gave me the job. I convinced them that I was very good at Excel, and that I was really adept at like answering phones, and I had reception experience. Like the lies were applied thick and fast because I really wanted to stay, and I was, you know, full of all these raging hormones. And so that they gave me the job, and I remember like the first few days of just being in that office, and I'd never worked in an office where they have like cubicles, where the cubicles come to maybe like just, you know, below your head kind of view. And people and phone calls were starting to come in, you know, suddenly this became really real. I was sitting in a desk, and people were calling this office, and they were asking for departments, and I was just answering the phone and then just kind of freezing and very gently putting the phone receiver down because I didn't actually know how to transfer the calls. And I did that for a while until, you know, until I could no longer get away with that. And even like things like, I remember that the line manager left me to my desk and he was like, oh, now you can record your personal, you know, message, so that when people ring you, you know, your answering message will be very professional. I just spent like hours like picking up, you know, trying to talk into the phone and putting it down again to record it. So like it was like ridiculous how I suppose self-conscious I felt in that job. But anyway, so I worked there for about 6 months, and I think one day Rupinda, who sat like sort of where that stone is at the back of the painting, like in the far distance, and she asked me how I was enjoying my new role, and I burst into tears. And I think the poor woman was so shocked that she said, maybe you should go outside and have a little walk around the block. So I did that. But I guess like for me, it was like my first time I'd ever felt sort of like really corralled in by life circumstances, and I didn't take it well, I can tell you. So I worked there for 6 months. I quit. I moved back to Ireland, and while I was home, I got a phone call from the company, and they asked me would I come back to work 3 days a week as an arts officer, and the money was like double what I was on for this like pretty lowly paid administrative role, and I was still in this romantic relationship. So so I said yeah, and my poor father watched me get back on a plane again after moving home and everyone giving me a leaving card and a €50 voucher for ASOS and all that. Got back on a plane, and back I went again. But actually, it was actually one of the best things I ever did for my art practice, because like after I finished the job, or sorry, after I finished the masters, like I really had no idea what exactly had just happened over those 2 years. Apart from the fact that Oscar Merlo was becoming this really successful artist, everything else had been a bit of a blur, and I think I needed time to just kind of I don't know, process what had happened. Like all these artists I'd met, all these galleries I'd been introduced to, you know, the whole experience, I suppose, of living in this huge international city and meeting all these people. And actually that office job became a real kind of like postgraduate experience for me. So like when I went back and did the next 2.5 years with them as this arts officer job, and this is my desk here. I actually asked, when Aoife asked me to do this talk, and I knew I'd be talking about a very bad one-to-one, I asked one of my old colleagues who actually sat on my interview for the administrative role, and we're still friends, he still speaks to me, but I asked him, could he send me a picture of the office as it is now? So the image on the right is actually, I suppose you could say, the inspiration for this painting that I made. And this is sorry, maybe I should minus, is this in the way, our little chat box? Is this, oh yeah, there we go. So this was a piece of text that I just wanted to show you. So I'll just read it briefly. Have you done the risk assessment for the sandwiches? He says. I look at him blankly. Egg sandwiches left in a fridge overnight pose a significant health hazard. A company man. The sound of him drinking tea announces the birth of capitalism. Slurp. I do not like tea. Does he suspect I've been cooking the books? I've been inputting fictional 80-year-old participants into the company software. TP Tracker evaluates the happiness levels of old folks doing creative activities into cash. Great old data altogether for the team meetings with executive. My high numbers mean Anne and Stella don't get their class pulled due to non-feasibility. We've been meeting weekly for a year now, working on a book about a French-speaking West Highland Terrier who lives in Paris. I wish I'd put floating boiled eggs circling above both the rock heads. So this piece of text, I guess, this is what I gave to Aoife when she asked me to submit a kind of description about the work. And I guess the story is based on Chris, who became my line manager for the arts officer role. And working with him was challenging at times, but also great. And he taught me a lot of things. And he and I used to often come to loggerheads over this piece of software that they used in the company, which was called TP Tracker. And I found it really interesting, this idea around so I organized a lot of activities for older people, and it would have been things like yoga or art classes, I actually did a lot of going back to the RCA, to my peer group, and asking different artists to come and do painting classes in the type of housing the company had it was called sheltered housing, and that was kind of where people could live independently if they you know, were of a certain age, but also maybe didn't have a lot of money or a pension plan necessarily. So it was sort of a good model of living. But also there was this strange kind of vein running through our company, even though we were a charity. There was this kind of like capitalist, I don't know, sort of sense to what they were at, and it was sort of sinister at times, I felt. But anyway, I used to cook the books because Anne and Stella were two of my favourite residents, and Stella was in a wheelchair, and she was incredibly frail, but it was the highlight. We used to meet once a fortnight, and I used to go to them, and they both used to. We did make this book about a West Highland Terrier who lived in Paris, but I suppose a lot of this kind of absurdity where I had to kind of lie to keep things that I felt were of a significant, I suppose, mental benefit to people, was sort of against company policy. So a lot of this, I suppose, I can now talk about in the work, in the safety that I've actually left the role. Sorry, I'm just having an issue there. Go on to the next slide. Oh yeah. So kind of sticking with what I should mention is that in the painting, Very Bad One-to-One, I'm looking at rocks, and the two figures in the painting are these kind of stony characters, and that interest in stones kind of goes back to after I finished up the creative arts role in London. I eventually moved back to Ireland. My dad wasn't very well, so I decided to move home, and the relationship had ground to a very abrupt halt in London. So I moved back to Ireland, and I was living with Dad for about a year, and I got a job in Dingle in Kennedy's Bar, and I started applying for things. And a very good friend, Molly King, who's a very interesting artist, she I applied for a residency she had spotted to do with the artist Lucian that EVA in Dublin were running, and I was very keen to get out of Kerry at that point because I'd been there for a year, and the bar job was starting to lose some of its glamour. So I applied for this residency and was lucky enough to get accepted. And so the kind of the offer was that I would have a couple of months living and studio space in the museum, and I'd have kind of access to Lucian Freud artworks and research him, and then come up with an artwork. So I came up with this piece called Portrait of a Stone, and this is it. It's a video piece, and it was displayed in the gallery for a show that we had at the end of the residency. So the Lucian Freud residency actually consisted of a couple of artists. There was 4 of us who were all looking at his work. So we had a group show, but this piece was mine, the drawing and the video piece. But the video piece really kind of, I suppose, stole a lot of that administrative language that I had experienced in London. And you can see, so these are 2 stills from the video piece. So you can see here on the left, you have the unemployed absent artists. Download and complete the unemployed absent artist form from our website. And then on the left, you have, please call your GP if you harbour secret admissions to represent your country in the Venice Biennale. But I was definitely riffing off things that I experienced in this office job, and just kind of the absurdities around, you know, what quantifies people being eligible for certain things. So some of that I would have experienced when I was, you know, being a really crap administrative assistant answering phones, and, you know, people explained to me some situations were really dire where they were looking for accommodation, and for whatever reason they didn't fit the remit that we could supply them with a place to live. And then, you know, that idea of ambition, and what I was explaining about Oscar Murillo, you know, please call your GP. So the idea, like, you know, is this kind of like really raw, visceral ambition, is it a really positive thing, or is it actually like quite dangerous? So it's kind of poking fun at that, I suppose. And I'm just going to play a tiny bit of the video piece, and it might be a little bit glitchy, but it's sort of a reading piece, so there's text that runs over it. But I'm just going to play a tiny bit for you there, just about a minute. So if you kind of get your hand in there, yeah, that's it. Dad. You walk off now. Yeah, so you can maybe tell that like the character on the left, this stone administrative assistant, is closely modelled on me, self-portrait of there. And also I worked a lot because my dad was quite unwell when I moved back from London. I had made a lot of recordings of him kind of in the landscape in Kerry, just doing different things. Like we went around to a lot of archaeological sites and sacred sites. This is a standing stone that's about 10 miles from where I live now at the moment in Inch. With no particular reason, to be honest, to film him, but more I think out of the urgency that I was really worried that he wasn't going to pull through the illness. But thankfully he did, and he's in a really great place now. But there was definitely kind of a documentation thing going on with me and my work and him. So then that I had that footage, and so the footage with the stone character kind of seemed to fit together. I should also say that this stone character on the left hand side, this stone is sitting on a chair. That became a big part of my work, where I called this particular stone, Brian Rock, and I collected him in a walk. I'm a big fan of walking, and I used to break up my time a lot over the years when I was living in Kerry with walks, and I started to collect stones at various points, and he was a particular stone that caught my eye. He's from a wall which is from there's a man called Bishop Casey who used to live in Inch, and he was a infamous character. I suppose he kind of broke the lid on a lot of the darker stuff that happened in the Catholic Church. But Brian Rock was from his wall. I acquired him for a while, and he became kind of a big stone character in my work. And so kind of continuing with that stoniness, this show was it's called Futures, and the RHA Gallery in Dublin, they run it every second year, but it's a really great show in terms of it just gives artists a chance to like have a big degree show type exhibition of their work. And like I hadn't really had that opportunity for a long time. Like the work that Aoife mentioned when she was doing her intro there, A Ruined World, this piece that I made years ago, like for me, I felt like that I kind of like a personality when it came to my practice. So I had this work that I made kind of post BA, and for the first few years of leaving the degree course in NCAD. And then I had this kind of interim period where I was still making that particular type of work. And then I suppose then I went to London, did the master's, and I felt like a big kind of shift had happened in the work. And the work really looks like it's made by two different people if I look at the older work and the work that I make now. But this show and the show in Emma with the Brian Rock video, or the Portrait of a Stone video, that really was the start, I think, of this new kind of work. So the Future show consisted of like a wall drawing that I made, and I showed the video piece Portrait of a Stone again in that gallery context, because apart from the show in Emma, it hadn't had any outings as such. And I also displayed a series of drawings. Oh, sorry. Right here. So these drawings were the kind of first time I started to introduce text into the work. So I started, all the characters were these stones, but I started to introduce these kind of small text pieces underneath, almost like little phrases, sort of narrative based. This is really, oh yeah, here we go. And so you can see there on the left, this one is, yes, John, I totally agree, we are fucked. Great to see you though, you've lost a pile of weight. So I was kind of referencing this type of behaviour that I noticed. I'm sure it's very common in all parts of Ireland and probably in all parts of rural landscape globally, but this kind of practice of, you know, meeting people and leaning against walls and chatting. And I always kind of loved that about Kerry, but also the kind of bizarre conversations that kind of come from those sort of random meetings. Like even now that I've moved back, like yesterday I went for, I've kind of changed up a gear. Like I used to be an avid walker, now I'm an avid jogger, but that's more for sanity reasons. But I went for a jog yesterday, and I took my very lovely partner Chris, not the fucker in London, with me for a jog to the beach. And en route to the beach, I managed to sympathise with one of the neighbours whose sister had unfortunately passed away. Then I went to another neighbour, and she told me that if I, on my way back from the run, that if I stopped in at her house and looked under the sign near her house, because she runs a B&B, that she had left a present for my nephew Oscar under the sign and near the bush. So, you know, there's this kind of really interesting thing that happens if you go for a walk or a jog in the countryside. So all that language kind of became part of these drawings. And then the slogan under the rock for an international art career, you may wish to consider changing your environment. I suppose that goes back to my years spent around Oscar Merlo, and kind of that question of whether you could be, you know, could you be a very successful international artist by living, you know, in a rural area, you know, question mark. And these are more installation images from that show. So you have the little table there. I made a book called The History of Head Trauma, where I kind of collected a lot of written pieces that I kind of jotted down over the years, shopping lists and random stories, more of these kind of neighbor type meetings that I would encounter from time to time. And then this brings me to a more recent project. I made this work last year. So this was a project award that I got from the Arts Council. They were really supportive and kind of helping me with this. Because never really many scale before. So sort of like the idea of folklore. I wanted to create some new folklore and try and contribute to folklore. So this mountain is part of my dad's farm in Kerry. So a lot of the mountain, most of it would be commonage, so it'd be shared ownership between maybe 5 to 6 farmers. But my father owns sort of below the telephone line, or sorry, below the electricity line, and kind of running along the mountain. It's a hard place to access, so there's a road that he made back in the 90s that comes halfway up the mountain. Where this photograph is taken from, you're actually very close to a main road that goes between the mountain on the other side, so we call it the Glen Road. But in order to do this work, we had to carry these letters for about an hour on our backs up the mountain. So physically, this was like kind of also one of the most challenging projects I did. And then myself and my friend Anne Maria installed The Rocks Are Tumbling Uphill, and we tied these down with wire, this sentence. But I suppose this work, like again, going back to that idea of stones, like this work, I loved this story called The Myth of Sisyphus by Camus, the writer Camus. And in The Myth of Sisyphus, this character is condemned to roll a rock up a mountain for the rest of his life, or for eternity. So the task ahead of him is really daunting, and I suppose the book kind of talks about like ideas of nihilism and, you know, the what is the point to things. And for me, I suppose my experience of living in London and kind of, you know, doing these really repetitive tasks, but kind of finding these really special moments where suddenly the most kind of meaningless thing kind of becomes imbued with something quite poetic or sort of interesting. So I wanted to kind of relay that message, I suppose, back to my neighbours. And I decided to make these words that would be installed on the mountainside. So it became like a kind of a geopoem. So I had, where did they go? Rocks are tumbling uphill. So that idea that like suddenly, instead of Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill, that they were tumbling up ahead of him. And like this mountain is full of these really amazing rocks that have been there since the Ice Age. And this part of Inch is also, it's got a very particular type of rock associated with it. It's called the Inch Conglomerate. And this was another part of the work, which is, this is the third text sentence. And it just says, Granny is orbiting the planet. And this is a screenshot from a friend sent this to me, where I think it was her like neighbor had gone on holidays to Kerry and had seen this on the mountain and sent her, or I put it up in her Instagram story, which I kind of thought was lovely, because that idea of like, I suppose I was thinking about how rumor travels and how gossip travels and how folklore travels. And I love that idea that it had its own kind of life, that it was sort of spreading out into the world. And so this was displayed in the mountain for about a year, actually. And there you can kind of see for scale, there's my father standing beside Granny. And then I decided to have a community meeting to talk about these words that appeared in the landscape, because I didn't really, you know, I suppose in terms of if you were someone living here, suddenly these words started to go up in the mountain, and the rumor mill like was really starting to kick off. So there's like an Inch Facebook page, so people had started to put it up on the Inch Facebook page, and people were saying that it was like for a film and that there was going to be filming props made, and then so the rumors were starting to kind of gather. So I wanted to have a meeting. I called it a community meeting. So the idea was that we would kind of discuss the messages that appeared in the mountain in the local pub, which is down the road from the letters. And so what I did for that was I decided to have a panel discussion. I wanted to be kind of a, I suppose, combined interest group. So I had Matt Packer, who's a curator, myself, and then I'd Liam O'Brien, who's a really interesting now geologist, and he taught me a lot about the conglomerate rock formation, and you know, he'd be very interested in folklore, and he's a really interesting combination of a really scientific man, but he also told me that he had seen a leprechaun on the mountain a couple of years ago when he was doing paperwork in his office, and the view from his window actually looked straight out at where I'd put the letters. And he told me that one day he was working on some maps, and he was staring out the window, and he said he kind of, I suppose, you know, when you get into that kind of meditative state when you're concentrating on something, but you have that kind of moment where you allow your mind to relax. And he said he was looking at the mountain, and he just said he was there, that suddenly this figure was there on the rocks, and he looked again and he had disappeared. And he said that the leprechaun was blue. So I just thought that was like the best thing ever. And Liam, you know, is so scientific in so much of his work and his personality, that I thought this was just so great that he'd seen a leprechaun. And there we are again. And so what I did was, as part of that project, I made a newspaper called the Interconglomerate, so called after this rock formation. And in the newspaper, so we gave everyone a copy of the newspaper who came to the community meeting, and then later on, I installed a newspaper box on a walkway called the Dingle Way, which overlooks the letters in the mountain. The idea was that people, if they wanted to kind of find out more about the words, that they could access the newspaper. And essentially, the newspaper was also, what I did was I wrote several different stories about the locality, some fictional, some based in folklore. And I also accessed the National Folk Archives and found stories that were related to the mountainside itself. And Liam would have been kind of well aware of a lot of these stories, and kind of reintegrated them into the text. So I suppose it was kind of that idea of archiving some of the stories that were very local to the area, and then kind of giving them, I suppose, reactivating them in a sense. And then this is just, I'll just chat about this very briefly. This was the show I did in February of last year. So it just managed to get the show up and closed before the pandemic came to be, which, you know, I'm really delighted that I had that opportunity. And so this was the text that I wrote about the exhibition. It's just an excerpt of it, but so in today's meditation, the show was called Headcase, I should say, which is based on a meditation app called Headspace. But I always love that idea of, I suppose, growing up in rural West Kerry as well, we have a lot of colloquial kind of expressions for mental health and things like that. And I was really interested in kind of digging into them a little bit. And I'm a big fan of meditation apps. I'm a regular meditator on the apps for whenever I can squeak in 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So I wanted to kind of use the format of the meditation apps that I was a fan of, and talk about how one produces a body of work under duress, shall we say, when you're a bit caught for time. And then, so the show Headcase, again, I suppose the stones were still in my head, and a very bad one-to-one was exhibited as part of this show. I should also mention that these panels that a very bad one-to-one is part of, I originally showed them in the Courthouse Gallery, which is in Simon, just after I did the Words in the Mountain piece. Again, going back to the idea of me being this kind of closet painter, like I would have had a lot of reservations about like whether or not I should be painting, and a lot of I suppose hesitancy about, you know, claiming to have a painting practice. Like I almost felt like people were going to call me out and be like, Jesus Christ, sure, she hasn't picked up a paintbrush in about 10 years, you know, how is she making paintings? So I decided that I would I made 6 panels, all these kind of this blue, pale blue, and I exhibited them in a courthouse in Steinman, almost, I have to admit, as a test site, you know, to kind of see how they go down, you know, and if anyone, you know, contacted the gallery and said Laura Fitzgerald is putting paintings on the wall, then I would know that maybe I would, you know, abandon ship on that front. But that didn't happen, thankfully, and a few people like Eamon Maxwell, thank you. Eamon had gone to see the show and had said some nice things about it, and I thought, well, if Eamon Maxwell isn't banning me from painting, then maybe there is hope. So then the show was coming up in the Ashford Gallery, and I decided to show the panels there. And I had these 3 beehive huts, and I worked with my mum Susan, who's a healer by trade. And you can be sure that goes down very well with all the West Kerry jokes about mental health. And so we worked together in a script, and the beehives that I made were based on these drawings that I'd made on paper. And I had a very particular way of kind of referencing how I made the drawings. So I wanted to be really descriptive about the materials that I used. So like pen and shite marker on Allen Field and fancy archival paper. I bought the markers and deals, you know, this kind of thing. I wanted to really fold all the ingredients into the work, but also make them quite public. And a lot of the show was, this is a rock trying to fill his car with petrol, and he feels guilty about the petrol. And I'm going to play you, so this is my mum's voice, my mum Susan, in her really good American Atlantic, mid-Atlantic accent. And this is a script that I gave her to work on. I'll just see this play now. Oh, sorry. I might come out of this. Oh yeah, there we go.
Welcome to Beehive Hut 1. I am Laura's mom. You are in a calm and quiet place. You are visualizing that this calm and quiet place, this tranquil oasis of serenity, is the M50. The M50 is now a national park. The M1 and the M8 are also now part of this national park. People walk the M1 and the M8 now from all over the world. The M1 and the M8 have now both become pilgrim routes. Picture the calm and serenity of this place. Nothing in this beautiful place is of any danger to you, except for the wild dairy cows who sometimes roam the park. They are now a protected species and only dangerous if you try to milk them. Take a deep breath. Hold this picture of the peaceful serenity of the M50 in your mind. Oak, ash, hawthorn, and rowan trees are casting dappled light onto the tarmac, which is starting to crumble, allowing for cowslips, buttercups, and primroses to peek through. The county councils have been investing heavily in native trees and wildflowers over the past 10 years, creating this beautiful heaven on earth.
Okay, so there's my utopian M50. And finally, I'm I wanted to share my most recent artist statement with you, and I'll just give it a read. My practice is a self-reflexive, a self-critical comment on how it is for me to be an artist and human. I'm making paintings about human behavior and art behavior. The latest one-to-one you had at the office while your head was exploding. The bullshit your therapist is trying to extradite from your head. A video explaining how sheep and cows are curators. I am unhappy with my previous statement. It was a bit crap and I would like to revoke it. Laura Fitzgerald is an artist working in drawing, video, and I'll try that again. Laura Fitzgerald is an artist. What is this again? She works in drawing, video, and installation, and she essentially would like to be Robert Smithson or David Shrigley. He is gas. She would like to be David Shrigley, have a show in the Hayward Gallery, and perhaps have her own greeting card range without anyone getting too judgmental. Laura Fitzgerald is an artist working in drawing, video and installation and wants to have 16,000 followers, real ones, on Instagram, together with several beehives in her back garden with a magnolia tree in bloom out front. Within the beehives there are bees which will not leave should she be away on residencies from time to time. She would like to be a character like Maurizio Catalan, but unfortunately she is probably too nice. Laura Fitzgerald meditates for 30 minutes every day and also runs every day. She inputs 6 entries in her gratitude journal and some CBT quiz questions before she can look you square in the eye. Laura Fitzgerald would like to tell you that her work is very political, but it is not. If it was incredibly politically engaged work, she would be working in politics. Likewise, if her work were socially engaged, she would have a job as a nurse. What Laura Fitzgerald's work would really like is to be represented by David Werner, and for him to pay for the framing bills and to convince prospective buyers that the drawings will not fade over time and are in fact incredibly archival. Laura Fitzgerald wishes she had better news for you right now, but she does not. So I shall leave it there. I hope I didn't go over time too much.
Laura, can I ask a question?
Great. Hey, Eamon.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you? Thanks for
Thank you.
coming.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words. I'm not sure I have that much importance in the art world in Ireland, but it's very kind of you to say such nice things.
You're massive in Ennis Diamond.
Well, not as big as your rock was in the pub. They only were saw through the window. Anyway, I had a quick question for you because you have always talked about, and certainly the stuff I've read about you, the impact of failure on your work is a big thing. And initially, I guess in your career, that was a frustration about not getting awards or exhibitions or whatever. But latterly, you've actually turned it into actually being part of practice in a way. And even your artist statement is, it's about failure. It's about, questioning all the time your validity as an artist for yourself and then vis-a-vis everyone else. But I wanted to sort of go back to your time at the RCA and, that experience of watching Oscar just sort of take off and become stratospheric. And I wonder if, this is an impossible question to answer, but if that had happened to you, if you had been the chosen one, not Oscar,
yeah,
what difference do you think that would have made to your work? And what I'm saying there, in a sense, is that thing about struggle and in struggling as an artist, leaving the cliches aside, actually make better work. I personally find Oscar's work really fucking dull. And it's really vacuous and it's really commercial and whatever. So I'm just curious to know about you, that the impact that's had on you as a maker.
No, that's a very, I think, valid question, because I've been thinking about that lately, and I found a really good article actually on this website called The Creative Independent, which is around using failure but not romanticizing it. So I suppose that's one aspect that I'm trying to be aware of these days as well, because I think exactly, I would have used failure a lot in the early days. I made a couple of videos that I would have applied to IMA with, that kind of helped me get onto the residency in IMA. And a lot of people find them really funny, and I suppose they had a certain traction, as in they got me a couple of places. But when I think back to the place I was in when I made those videos, I was driving to the pub for work and had some of the scenes, and I had my phone on the dashboard, which is probably highly dangerous as one side of it. But also I was genuinely going God, am I going to work in a bar for the rest of my life? And is this going to be it, year in, year out? In response to the first part of your question, the emotions were very real at the time, in terms of, I think that's shifted a bit, as in, I don't work, all pubs in Ireland are now closed, so that's a positive outcome of the last few months. I think that we've spoken about that a lot, myself and colleagues from the Royal College, because I wasn't the only one who felt the kind of the weight of what was going on. But a lot of us have kind of talked about how, it's such a long game, art, isn't it? It's kind of in conversations I've had over the last few years, even with people in the fire station, the kind of manifesto we came up was just try and stay alive, try and stay healthy and sane to a degree, and sure, eventually, if you just keep making the work, like it'll kind of find its way out in the world. And it's more about maybe trying to keep yourself interested in your own practice, that'll give you, you know, the impetus to kind of stay in the game. So like I get, and a lot of like RCA colleagues would have said that like there is a crash and burn scenario that can happen. Now I definitely don't think it's going to happen to Oscar. I'm pretty sure he's like, you know, lock, stock and barrel, home and dry. You know, he'll be in massive shows, Phil Kingdom Come, which is great for him. Like he's actually a nice dude. Like, but I suppose to kind of, yeah, like like I suppose if you get success very early on, maybe like there is dangers in that too, because you probably kind of make a particular kind of work to that to what you got kind of well known for, and then it kind of stays the same. Whereas I think maybe I've learned as a coping strategy to try and turn life situations into art in a way. So like even when I was in Dublin there in the fire station, like I worked in another bar in the Royal Oak in Dublin, and used to kind of, I think, because I was always kind of shy as a person, and I think the years of working in bars have helped me even do things like artist talks, or, you know, narrate my videos or stuff like that. So it teaches you, maybe failure teaches you to a degree, like how to turn things that it can be really like hard or problematic into more useful, you know, to kind of like as yeah, I guess it's like coping mechanisms or tools to kind of get you through, and then hope David Werner will be like, what about, you know, unknown artists in Kerry's work. She can still fantasize, I suppose, you know.
Yeah. But I think you're right, because in some of the artists I know, maybe from a slightly earlier generation from the RCA, like Idris Khan would be an obvious one. You know, Idris made a certain kind of work for his MA show, and it's now all he's been able to do for the past almost 15 years now, in terms of he's been sort of pigeonholed to make these repetitive photographs. And they're very lovely and very polished and whatever. But, you know, I think, you know, when I'm talking to artists, I think that the pressure of the gallery system, you know, for a lot of people, certainly when I was in art school, the gallery system was the only way to make it as an artist. That's not true anymore. I mean, I think the gallery system's still there, but what's shown during the pandemic is that if artists can survive and thrive outside that system, they have the ability to keep making interesting work. And I think if you go too far into that commercial system, you just get trapped with making variations of the same work. I think that's been what's been really great watching your career, is you've stuck to your kind of principles, but you've been able to adapt and evolve and change in a way that Oscar probably hasn't been able to. So I think the failure in a weird way might be his, not commercially but artistically, because obviously you're able to sort of, you know, change and shift and evolve. So I'm gonna shut up now because I always talk too much of these things.
No, it's good.
But Laura, thank you so much for that. That was so fascinating. I have to say, it's so funny in that way how your life and your art just are so intertwined. And I have to say, your particular worldview is so interesting. You know, you really get a sense of your evolution as a person, and how it's so close and how it's so involved in your art practice. I want to ask you, I want to invite more people to ask questions, but I want to ask you particularly, now that you've returned to Kerry and to Inch, and really understanding your practice of being so involved in the local community and those works, those public artworks, I mean, they're really impressive. You know, what does the local community think about you and your work there?
Yeah, like it's funny, even like we're only home down here about a month now, and yesterday I got a phone call from a local teacher, and like he said like, oh hey, you know, Laura, and he was like, so we want to make a sign for the bell in the church, and we were wondering, you know, would you make the sign and blah blah blah. So anyway, I've agreed to do a drawing of a ship. There was a ship was it came up on the Inch Beach is like a long sandbar that goes out into the sea, and in the 1800s the Manchester Emergence, which is this huge steamliner, crashed onto the sand, or it came, you know, got grounded on the sandbar. So the bell was then, I think the local people were actually really good to the people on the ship, so they brought them in and fed them, and dried them off and everything, and got them back on their feet again. But my granny's house is next door, and the dining room door in the good room that we were never left in when we were kids is the door from the ship. So the bell in the church that's a few fields over is the bell from the Manchester Merchant. So anyway, so I think there's a fine line to be walked. But he did say to me on the phone as well. He was like, "Would you know any graphic, or could you do the, you know, the lettering and everything?" I was like, "Oh no, like I'd be lying to you if I said I'm any good at graphic design. No, 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 no." And then I was like, "God, who's a graphic designer? And I was looking at Chris, my partner, who's like, he was editing the visual artist news sheet, but since he moved to Kerry, he's left BAI. And Chris is like, "No, no, like don't start the community, you know, scheme too early on. We'll like do it slowly." But I know, like, I suppose telling you this story is kind of my way of trying to explain that. Yeah, like I do feel, you know, very kind of like close to this community, you know, as in they're kind of like I've grown up in it, and like over the years they would have bought paintings that I made, say when I was like 18. You know, there's like some fairly horrific paintings in people's houses in the locality of, you know, lovely landscapes or a bit of Inch Beach, or, you know, that kind of thing. But I would like to do something again like the Letters in the Mountain piece, maybe in a year's time, or in a year and a half time. I'm thinking about doing something again, maybe to do with painting actually, and to do with doing something outdoors again. But because there is something here, like I think I get a lot of ideas from living here, or at least coming back and living here for a while and then going again, you know, kind of having a bit of both. So I'm hoping that maybe being here I think it will shape things. It just can't not, you know, it's that kind of place that like there's certain community people here, and there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of characters, and those characters definitely kind of inform, you know, what I'm interested in and stuff. So yeah, I'm hoping to do another project, you know, kind of around that. People ask me like if I meet people around, less so since I did the letters and the landscape piece, but prior to that, people would always ask me whenever I was home, "How was the painting going?" And I would always say, "Great, great."
You know how to answer them. And in that way, the primary school teacher that was in touch with you, I mean, does he understand your practices? Was he actively engaged?
I mean, yes and no. Yeah, yeah, it's sort of hard to know. I actually don't know. Yeah, I mean, in the way, in as much as you know, he's still like, "Could you make me a sign with a ship on it for, you know, for the bell?" Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yes and no. Yeah.
Well, you'll bring him on his journey anyway.
Yeah, there might be an art project in it, maybe, you know.
I wonder, does anybody else have any questions? Niamh, Mary Ruth, Claire, anybody else? I see lots of people still in the Zoom.
Just to say hi, Laura. We've never met, but I've met Chris in
Hi,
one of
Mary.
the.
Yeah, I know
How you
your
doing?
work and everything.
And
Yeah, thanks for coming.
no, it'd be a pleasure, and it's just lovely as well, which is really nice. The humor that's overt in you know, but really clever. So it's really great. And no, it's really nice to hear that. And it's strange because I would be a Dublin born and bred, and it's, you know, like a couple of miles down the road. It is a different language, and as well the London experience again. It's quite kind of familiar. And again, it's a whole different sort of communication system. But so it's really nice to kind of be brought back to those times. And well done you. Yeah, well done you.
Thanks very much.
Claire?
Hi, Laura. Just to say thanks a million. It was such a refreshing and highly entertaining. And I think for all the artists in the room, so many things that they can identify with, from those, you know, bar jobs to like that, being asked by the local bar where, you know, when I was in college, being asked would I do the business card for the man who sold a bit of some bog. You know, and so all of those things, and those admin jobs that you're like, when are they going to find me out, and how long can I last? But yeah, just highly entertaining, as well as being just really refreshing. And just thank you so much for your time and for having us in your studio this morning.
Oh, thanks Claire. Thanks a million.
And Laura, best of luck with your work in Kundakiri, and thanks for those landscape views of your lovely videos last weekend, and keep up the good work, and thanks a million, and see you all soon.